Hello, welcome to our webinar today on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grants for fiscal year 2023, which for us runs from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. I am Carolyn Koska. I'm the Grants Administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, and I'll start out first by just running down what we're going to talk about today. First, we'll just talk briefly about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council itself. We'll take a look at the guidelines for this grant program. We'll go over to our website and look at what resources are available for you there. Then we will head into the grant system and walk through the application. And we'll finish up talking about the grant process, or what happens after you submit your application. I will ask everybody to mute for the most part here today. We'll stop a couple times for questions, and you can unmute then, or feel free to type questions into the chat. And then also at the end, if you want to talk more about a specific project, we can do that too. So Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMAC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services, which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. Here is our region down in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota and work to get all of those state funds out there. So our funding does come mostly from the state of Minnesota. We have an allocation from their general fund, and we also get the most of our money from the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive some funding from the McKnight Foundation that we use for our grants for artists, and from donations and memberships from our region. So organizations applying have to be located within our region, which includes these 18 counties: Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac-qui-Parle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, or tribal lands within that area. And we acknowledge that this region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Types of organizations that can apply for this grant. This grant is mostly focused on arts organizations, and we are defining those as 501c3 nonprofits whose missions are focused primarily on the arts. Other nonprofit organizations can apply, but they need to have some clear arts needs for the project, and same with units of government, which would be city, county, tribal government, again, with some clear arts needs. If your organization does not have their 501c3 nonprofit status yet, you can apply using a fiscal sponsor, which is another organization, any other nonprofit organization who does have that full nonprofit status, and they act literally as your sponsor in that they receive your funds for you and kind of manage all of the money stuff for your project. So you can feel free to approach an organization in your community and see if that is something that they do, if they are interested in being your fiscal sponsor. For your application, you will need to attach an agreement that your organization comes up with the fiscal sponsor organization that kind of spells out how that relationship is going to work, how paying of bills is going to happen, et cetera. So you'll need to attach that. And then someone from the fiscal sponsor organization will need to sign all grant documents as well, including the application. On to what you can actually do with an equipment and facilities improvement grant. These really are to strengthen arts organizations' capacity in order to serve the arts needs of their community. So here's just a list of some things that we have funded before under this program. as it says, projects may include but are not limited to, so you may have other things, but this may include sound and lighting equipment, various things needed for a theater, such as curtains, trapdoors, etc. Instruments, studio equipment for arts classes, various kinds of storage you might need, office equipment like computers, printers, software, office furniture or other chairs and tables for your space, and structural improvements, which may be things like updating bathrooms to make them more accessible, heating or cooling systems to make the space more comfortable, etc. So with these improvements or equipment purchases that you have, if your organization works out of a space that it does not own, you need to have a cooperative agreement with the owner of that space that kind of outlines how you'll be sure to have access to your equipment and your improvements that you do in this building. So the cooperative agreement would include things like who has keys to this space? Do other people using this space get to use your new equipment or not? What happens if you move to a new space, etc. So you'll want to make sure to set that up and include that. And again, that's just if you are working in a space that your organization does not own. So these grants are available for up to $10,000. And this year, I see I've got a typo there. It should say in fiscal year 2023, no matching funds are required. During all of this COVID business, we have been waiving the requirement for applicants to provide matching funds. So what that means is your organization does not need to contribute financially to the project unless the cost is more than the amount that you can request from us. We don't know what is going to happen with that, what our board will decide for next year, but at least for this year, again, fiscal year 2023, you are not required to contribute a match toward the project. Another caveat with these equipment and facilities grants, there is a limit to how much you can receive from us just for these equipment grants within kind of a rolling 10-year time frame. So we'll run a report every year of the last 10 years and see if anybody has received that much in equipment and facilities improvement, and then they'll probably have to take a year or two off of making requests just to free things up for more applicants. All right, continuing on. Eligibility things. These are all going to not be eligible for our grants, things that we cannot pay for. And that includes new construction or purchase of real estate, any kind of for-profit activities or organization, projects that don't have an art focus, educational projects within a school system. So schools cannot apply for this grant program. Other things that we cannot pay for are activities that take place outside of Minnesota, since we are using state funds for these grants. We can't fund fundraising events. In other words, the grant funds should allow you to break even on your project, not to make a profit. If you are already receiving operating support from us, you cannot include prorated operating type costs in this budget. We can't fund payments of debts incurred before the grant begins or any purchases that actually happen before that time. You can't use these grant funds as a match for another grant from us, and we can't fund applicants who have a past due final report still out there. So important dates. We have 2 rounds for this program this year. The first round, the deadline is September 14th. and that is for projects that can start November 1st or later. And our second round, the deadline is February 8th for projects starting April 1st or later. And for all of our deadlines, you need to submit your application by 4:30 p.m. The system will not allow you to submit after that time. So in talking about dates, you're going to need to choose a start date for your project. And you always want to check what that earliest allowed start date is, because you can't start any project activities or spend any funds toward the project before that start date. So nothing can be purchased before the earliest start date, certainly, but whatever date it is that you choose as your project start date. And then you also need a project end date. And it's a good idea to give yourself plenty of time to complete and evaluate the project. You'll be asked to provide some information on your outcomes for the project. So it helps to think ahead and give yourself a little extra time to maybe have a performance with the new equipment or a class in the space with the new heater going, just to get some feedback from your participants and audience on how those improvements are working for you. So be sure to allow some time for that. And projects that are awarded this year need to be finished up by June 30th of 2024. You need to have people in 2 roles assigned for this project. The first is the project director, and they're going to be the person who's really the most involved in overseeing all that day-to-day activities of the project. Then you'll also need an authorizing official, and that is somebody from your organization that has authorizing power. So one of your officers probably. Sometimes it turns up that the president ends up being the project director in that case, because we do need to have 2 different people. Someone else from the organization would need to be the authorizing official, like the treasurer, for instance. And both of these people need to sign all documents related to the grant, including your application. And I will stop here for a moment for questions. Feel free to either unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can type things into the chat.
Carolyn, Mark Gleesner, I've got a question.
Okay.
We are getting an operating fund grant this year and next. How does that impact an improvement? Say if we needed new carpeting or something.
That doesn't make any difference. If you have the operating support money and in your equipment grant, for some reason you were wanting to pay for the utilities during the time that the improvements are happening, that would be a prorated operating type cost that you couldn't include. So it's fine. We consider the equipment and facilities improvement a totally separate project from whatever you're doing with your operating support money.
Okay, so you said prorated. Is there, so there's no operating funds that could be in there, or a prorated amount, or what?
So what we usually see with groups that aren't doing operating support, they might, let's say they're a community theater group, and they're applying for doing their fall season of activities, and they might divide out, okay, here's so many months of our utilities and rent, and if they have a staff person or something, those would be those prorated operating type costs. But if a group does not have operating support from us, those are okay to include in a project type grant.
Typically, would those be during the period of the grant or of the project, or when they do that, or?
So let's say you are applying for your activities for the next 6 months, and then you might then calculate out 6 months worth of all those building costs. But like I said, that can't happen if you do have operating support from us.
Okay, that helps. Thanks, Carolyn.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Hey, this is Eric. I'm new to this. I was wondering if you don't have an organization set up yet, as far as a nonprofit, and you're going to be running through another one that's yet to be decided. Does the authorizing user need to be involved in the organization that would be funneling things through?
We'd actually prefer that to be a separate group.
A separate person?
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit more about your situation?
Yeah. So I'm renting out like a space that I want to start as like a studio for local artists. And I live up in like the Wilmer area, so it's kind of like rural artist stuff, and I want to have it so it's like really affordable for kids or local bands to come and record their music and get something like really professionally done, kind of as like a springboard to like kind of get to better things. And so I'm looking to possibly get a grant for like maybe like a vocal booth and maybe some more like recording equipment to just kind of like finalize the space, because right now we're getting it set up for like kind of live band and instrument recording. But as far as like vocals go, that's going to be kind of a big financial step to acquire. So I'm kind of looking at a couple local nonprofits. I think it's like Wilmer Main Street, and there's a few other ones. I'm working with Sarah Swedberg from the EDC here in Wilmer, and she's kind of getting me started in all this stuff. So I'm pretty new to applying for grants and all that. But she did seem to think that what I'm doing would be like eligible for that kind of help. So yeah, that's about what we're doing. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So you either need to have created an organization that sort of their mission is to run this space. And so you would need to have at that point, it asks about your board and what activities have you done. So you do need a little bit of a track record. And you just have not applied for your official status yet.
No, we
you'd be using a fiscal sponsor, or it may be that there's another organization that just wants to take on managing that space. And I don't know, again, all the details for you, but then they would be the actual applicant, not the fiscal sponsor.
Okay.
So I think we need to keep moving on here, but we will definitely pause again for some more questions. And I am going to move us over to our website. Here we are. And before we do anything, I'm just going to point out on the homepage here, the fastest place to get to the grant system. So if you scroll down below these slides here, there's this black grants box with a login button. So that'll be your easiest place to get back to the grant system. But first, we're going to just take a look at some things we have available for you here. This is our workshops and assistance page that just is a good reminder for all of the ways that you can get questions answered, get help, et cetera, as you are working on an application. We've got some Q&A sessions coming up throughout the rest of the year. You can grab some time on my calendar if you want to talk through something. And then we have listed here all of the grant workshops that we have for this year. Some of them that have already happened, you'll see there's a recording from that. And these ones that are coming up, you can register. So you can come back here maybe in about a week to check and see if the recording from today's webinar is available here. But now we're going to head over to our actual grant of the day. And here's our equipment and facilities improvement grant. Here's another place to get to the grant system, this apply now button. You don't have to actually be applying to click this. It just takes you to the login page. but that is there for you. And then we have a bunch of materials posted for you that will be helpful. Here are the guidelines for the grant. We have the application questions available for you, one, so you can just kind of look at them ahead of time, but they are also in a Word document if you prefer to write your draft in there and then paste things into the grant system later. We have a budget form, although you can also grab this within the application. The scoring criteria for this program, so what the review panelists will be considering as they are scoring your application, and then the final report questions, just to give you an idea of what you may be getting yourself into later in the project. We've got all the important dates and deadlines here for each of the rounds that we have. We've got a date for the last day you can request a draft review by staff, and we'll talk more about that later. There's the deadline. Here's the date that the panel will be reviewing that bunch of grants, the date that our board will make an action on funding those grants, and then the earliest date that you can start your project. And then down below, we just have some alternative ways to apply and a video tutorial for the grant system. So we're going to jump ahead and click apply now to go into the system and look at that application. If you already have an account in the system, you would just go ahead and log in here. If you are totally new, there's a create new account button. But if you're not sure if you or somebody from your organization already has an account in here, just contact us and we can let you know about that, get you all figured out. Just gonna log in here. All right. Just a note that if you also use this system as a panelist sometimes, make sure to change your role to applicant. And now you'll see your applicant dashboard. And this is where you'll come to when you log in, unless you are coming in for the first time, and then you go straight to this apply page. So this lists all of the grants that we have currently available. The organization grants are listed first here. So here's our equipment and facilities improvement grant. If you want, you can preview the application without actually starting anything. Otherwise, if you're ready to go, you can click apply, which is what we're going to do. All right, so I'm just going to point out a couple of buttons here as we get started in the application. There is Google Translate embedded into the site. So if you need to work in a different language, you can choose that here and it will translate the interface and questions for you. So you are able to work in that language. Then we have the copy previous answers button. If you have done an application in the system before, you can choose to copy answers over from that onto a new application. It'll copy over anything that has the same, any questions that are the same between the two applications. So it's helpful for like basic organization information. Then there's the collaborate button. If you'd like to invite someone else to work on the application with you, you can put their email address here, choose what level of permission you like to give them, and then send a message asking what it is that you need them to do. If they need to upload some photos for you, or you just want them to proofread or put in some audience numbers, and you can invite them to do that. They'll receive an email and they'll just need to create a password to come in and work on this if they don't already have an account in here. Right at the top, we have a reminder of how to get some help if you run into questions while you're working on this. Again, here you can schedule some time on my calendar, or I've got my email address there as well. Then you'll need a name for your project. You can see by these examples, just something very basic describing what it is that you're doing. And you can enter there the amount you're going to be requesting, but you'll probably want to wait until you have filled out your budget form to do that. We've got here again links to the guidelines and scoring criteria, and just some tips. I'll just talk briefly about the character limits. You'll see that the limit for most of the fields is pretty large. And we are not expecting you to use up all of those characters. We want to make sure we have plenty of room in case you have a lot to say about something, but don't feel like you need to pad out your answers in order to fill that out. So your first question here is to describe your project. What is it you want to be doing? If you are working with a consultant or a contractor, why did you choose them and what are their qualifications? Who from your organization is going to be involved in the project? And then detail your timeline for what's going to happen. Then we have these couple of questions that say supplemental materials. This is optional, but you can upload things here if you think it helps your project make a little more sense. If you need to include some photos of the space or some really detailed specs on a particular piece of equipment that you're buying, you can do that here. And then here is where, if you did not own the space where these improvements are going to be happening, you can upload that agreement with the owner organization. And there's a sample one here that you can take a look at. Then you'll just enter in your start and end date for the project. And it does remind you here how early or late that could be. Then is your budget section. You can either use our Excel budget form or create your own budget. We're going to take a look at the Excel version. All right, so here is the budget form. Up here, you can either type your organization name or project title, and then you can just start listing items of costs that you're going to have. And I'll stick in some numbers here. And you'll see as we do that, it is adding up for us. And then down here, if you have any, maybe you've done some fundraising for this project, any other funds that are going towards this that you have. And then it will calculate for you here the amount that you can request. So this takes the cash cost minus the other funding and tells us your request cannot exceed $6,000 or the maximum request amount for this grant program, whichever is less. So we find our equipment and facilities, $10,000, and our $6,000 is less. So that's what we can request. But let's say that we had a more expensive project here. And now it tells us our request can't exceed $11,000 or the maximum, whichever is less. So this time the maximum here, 10,000 is less. So that's what we can request. And then it's got this little profit double check, and here it tells us then we are $1,000 short, which means we're going to need to come up with another $1,000 to do this project. So that's the budget form. You'd fill that out, save it, and upload it into the application here. And then there's a space here for just some narrative if there are some details that just don't fit into that budget spreadsheet, or you want to show how you came up with certain numbers. Then this next section is all about your organization. So you'll need your mission statement, a brief history, who your primary constituents are, and what kind of support you typically receive from your community. Some information about your board. How do you choose your board members and how do they represent the diversity of your community? And then we'd like you to provide the names of those board members. You can either type them also into the same text box or upload a separate document here. Then we ask about your programming. What kinds of programming do you offer? How do you make your artistic choices? How do you choose artists that are at the appropriate level for the kinds of activities that you're trying to do? And do your projects have potential for participants and audience to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts? So really talking about your specific program and how you make those choices. Then we ask you to think about the underserved groups in your community. Who might those be? And then what do you generally do to reach out to or involve those groups in your projects? And we do want you to come up with actual proactive things that you're doing versus saying, well, we're just open to everybody. So think about that, and then also provide a little information about accessibility with your organization. Do you have an access plan? How do you make sure your projects are accessible to those with various disabilities? Then you are asked about the impact of this project. What are your goals for this project? What do you want, either this new equipment or improvements to your space? What do you want, what kind of changes do you want those to bring about for participants, audiences, artists, your organization? Will it be strengthening your ability to provide high quality arts activities? Are there specific programs that will benefit from this? And so this is a good place as we go into how do you plan to measure or prove that those changes have taken place? This is where it kind of ties back in to allow yourself some time to use the new equipment or space in order to get some feedback about it. So how are you going to measure these changes that have taken place? And if you are doing a survey as part of that, you can upload that here. Then it's asking about audience numbers, which can be kind of difficult for this equipment project. But we ask you to think about either estimate audience numbers for your first performance or activity with that new equipment, or if it makes more sense for you to just estimate how many people might experience those results over the course of the year. Then we're just collecting a little data that we send on to the state, some demographics and more about yearly audience numbers. And then we've got just a bunch of contact information fields. Here's where you would put in your project director, your authorizing official, mark who is the grant writer in case we have questions. If you are using a fiscal sponsor and click yes here, spaces will show for you to fill in that information. And here's where you would put your agreement with that fiscal sponsor. And then at the end here, we have our signatures, which are a good place to use that collaborate button from on top if you need to have your fiscal sponsor come in here and sign, for instance. So a couple buttons down at the bottom here, save and submit. The system will be auto-saving for you as you work, but if you click the Save Application button, it'll bring you to the screen where it lets you know what things have you not answered yet. And you'll see that pretty much everything is in there because we haven't done anything, but this just helps you track your progress. And you would click continue here if you are going to keep working, but we're going to go back to our dashboard. And here now is this application where we just started. And if you want to go back and keep working, you would just click that edit application link. And then if you're awarded a grant, this is the place where you would come back to find your contract and your final report to be able to work on those. And we're just going to jump back over to the slides again here and take another short question break. Anything that I can answer
Hey,
at this point?
Eric again.
Mhm.
So since I don't have like an organization set up and it's just kind of getting started, at least for this time around applying for it, if I do find some kind of like sponsorship organization, could you just kind of like maybe explain a little more like what um, the requirements of that are as far as like a sponsorship and what their involvement is and like kind of like everything?
Yeah. So if you don't actually have your own organization actually started yet in any way, um, I think it would be kind of hard to find an organization who would be up for being the sponsor for this kind of project when it's for um, purchases that don't necessarily benefit them.
Okay.
But if you did find such an organization who would really probably take this on as their project, then
Mhm.
this space would probably remain under the wing of this organization.
Okay.
They would need to be a 501c3 nonprofit themselves.
Okay. Yeah, there's like I think it's called like Wilmer Main Street. So there's like a local kind of organization that deals with like the kind of the area of the city that I'm in.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna kind of, and I know a guy that works with it too. He did say that he might be interested in like working together. But so basically, if I file this through the organization originally, am I tied to this organization for future projects and everything else, or is there a way that like I can start out
Um,
with an organization and split it up, or
if you would create your own organization, you could then just separate from your fiscal sponsor for sure. I guess it wouldn't be a fiscal sponsor to begin with. They would be the actual applicant. But if you kind
okay,
of separated ways um, and had an organization, then you could be the applicant.
all right, thanks. That was helpful.
I'm just going to continue on for now, and we can stop again at the end if there are any questions remaining. Some tips for as you are getting ready to work on this. Think ahead to make sure you're choosing the best round for your project. Just to make sure with those start dates that it makes the most sense with what you're trying to do. Make sure you find and read those guidelines and the criteria just to know what you're going to be scored on. It can be really helpful, but we also don't want you to complete a whole application and then discover that some major part of it was ineligible. So make sure to read those. It's also good to start working on your application earlier than you think you need to. Just you maybe tracking down quotes on work you want done, or even just to get questions answered as you're working on your application. Then you'll have seen in the application that there are most of the questions in there have multiple parts to them. So really make sure that you are covering all of those in your answer, that you didn't miss any of those. And as we talked before, we can just keep things really concise and clear. No need to try and make it longer. Also, no need to feel like you need to use any special grant language. You can just write this in everyday language. It's also good to assume that the grant review panelists don't know anything about your organization or your project, even if it's something that is a recurring project every year. They are coming from around the entire region, so it is quite likely that they have not heard of your organization or event. And also, just don't hesitate to contact us as you are working on things. We do often find as we're reviewing applications coming in, and we say, "Oh, I wish they had just talked to us. We could have." Headed off this little issue here. So please, if you have any questions, it's a good idea to talk to us. So multiple ways to do that. You can just talk through your project before you're even getting started, just to make sure you are even under the right grant program, that your activities are all eligible. Again, you can get answers to any questions as you're working on the application. And then we touched on briefly before, we can review your application before you submit it. If you let us know that you have a draft ready, we can go in there and take a look, make sure you're not missing anything. And we can point out things like, oh, I think this section might be really confusing to the panelists, maybe some more information there. So if you let us know up to that date that's listed, that's about 2 weeks before the deadline, we can guarantee that we're able to take a look at your application. After that point, we can't guarantee that. You could still ask and see if we have time, but it is good to take advantage of our quick review of your draft. So what happens after you submit your application? First, we as staff review your application for eligibility and completeness. We'll check to see if you're missing anything, or again, if there's something possibly ineligible. At that point, we will contact you and you'll get 48 hours to remedy the situation. And then at that point, that's our staff last contact with your application. We don't have any say over who gets funded or not. That is all done by the panel and the board. So that bunch of applications will get sent on to the review panel of individuals from around our region, who will discuss and score the applications based on the criteria, which we'll look at in a second. And then their scores and recommendations go to our board of directors, who make the final funding decisions. So the criteria for this grant program are the feasibility of the project, which is worth 15% of your score, the merit of your organization and artistic quality of its programs, worth 32% of the score, and then the impact the project will have, worth 53% of your score. And if you open that criteria document, I think we looked at a couple of different places where you can find that. That actually has bullet points under each of these that goes into a lot more detail. So make sure to look at that. That can be really helpful. Then after the panel is finished scoring, in between that and things moving on to the board, you can have some additional percentage points added to your score. If you are a first-time applicant to us, if your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you're from a county that has not received too many grants from us in the last year. So you could earn up to 3 points here. That would be, again, those are just percentage points that would be added to your score before it goes to the board. And then if you are awarded a grant, you'll have 30 days to complete your contract. And then this is a big change for us this year. In the past, we've always paid out 80% of your funds at the beginning of your project, and you've received the remaining 20% at the end once you've finished your final report. And starting this year, we are going to be paying out the full award at the beginning of the project. You do need to acknowledge the grant in some way. With these equipment and facilities grants, it can be a little difficult to figure out what that looks like. But if you do something, you would have a credit line from your grant contract that you would need to use. You may need to include this Minnesota, legacy logo, and we'll send all that stuff to you. But for some of these, people might just put a sticker on the piece of equipment so that as it gets used, you'd see that funding source, or maybe your newspaper is doing an article about your new things, include that acknowledgement there. So that is pretty easy then for this program. Then we know that sometimes things just happen while you're doing projects and you may need to make changes. Maybe, I don't know, something happens that somebody's not available and you won't be able to finish your project on time, or maybe some piece of equipment that you're going to buy is no longer available. Just contact us, and things that we may be able to do could be extending out your project end date. Maybe we can help you find something else to spend that money on that's still in the spirit of your original project. So no need to worry if things suddenly are not working or suddenly change. We should be able to help you work around those things. And then your final report would be due 60 days after your project end date. And it's a good idea as you're getting started on your project just to take a look at that report, and so you know what kinds of things to pay attention to during your project, like saving your receipts, what you need to do for reporting on your outcomes, etc. So that is all the equipment and facilities information that I have today. Just pointing out some new contact stuff for us. We have moved. We are now at 509 West Main Street in Marshall, and our hours are also slightly different. So again, just check that we're around if you're planning to stop by, but we should be around in our office these hours here. But we are in a different location. So we can just come back to any questions now. We've got a few minutes before the end of the hour here. If there is anything else you'd like to talk about.
Carolyn, Mark Gleasoner here. Question on, after the awards are made, we'll get a notes from the reviewers and how we scored.
Yep, usually in your, you'll get an email that lets you know whether you've been awarded or not. And in either case, there will be your scores and comments included from the review.
In past ones that we've submitted and looking at the comments, it looks like comments from several different reviewers. Do all the comments come back or just select comments from reviewers, or how's that?
Usually if there have been multiple people who have said the same thing, we'll only include one of it. It's kind of a summary of your comments. It doesn't include every single one.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Hey, it's Eric again. So like as far as activities, like becoming eligible and like looking like, like a real organization and stuff, would it like do a lot to like involve kind of like high schools and like local kind of younger kids and stuff too, and then maybe having like some sort of like battle of the bands for like kids, where like, or battle of the artists kind of thing, and doing things like that, like hosting some more kind of volunteer type stuff. Is that what you guys are primarily looking for as far as like an organization goes?
Yeah, it would just be, I don't know, any sort of events or activities that you would have going on, whether that's like you said, performance space available for people. If you had, I don't know, some kind of class there, if people were able to come in and do some recording. I think those would all be so basically the kinds of activities that you eventually wanted to be doing there.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
All right, I think we will finish up here today. And if any of you want to talk further, you can sure grab a time on my calendar. But otherwise, good to see you all here today, and we hope to hear from you. Have a good afternoon.